Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we're here for my LPL Round 4 overview and analysis. Incredibly excited to get into this one. We have finally gotten to our top 4 teams in the LPL. These playoffs have honestly kind of flown by, especially compared to every other region. While every other region plays, once, twice, maybe even 3 times a week at most, LPL's playing every single day. No difference from the regular season here when it comes to the Chinese League of Legends scene, but I'm incredibly excited now that we have losers bracket brought into the fray, brought into the mix. I think that it opens up a lot more interesting possibilities for how these series go. Of course, it's not, lose and be eliminated. You still have that extra life now, but it does mean that some of these teams can maybe experiment a bit more, and these are really going to be the 4 teams that are going to prove whether or not they are the best in the entire world. And so, excited to get into it. If you want my full thoughts on what I think is going to be happening in the 2 series in Round 4 today, you can go ahead and check out my Round 3 video. At the end of that one, I went over both of these series that we're going to be covering in today's video. I previewed them both. I talked about who I think was going to win, why I thought they were going to win, but mostly I just talked about the matchups, because I do think that matchups matter more than predictions. I gave predictions just because people really like those, but at the end of the day, how 2 teams stack up against each other I think is significantly more important, and I spend a lot more time talking about that. But without further ado, I don't want to waste you guys' time. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. We're going to be going series by series. Both of the series in Round 4 were definitely intriguing, but we're going to be kicking it off with our top seed here. The first time we're going to be seeing our top seed in the playoffs. We have the number 1 seeded JD Gaming taking on the number 5 seeded Bilibili Gaming. A very interesting matchup between these 2 teams. BLG kind of upsetting Weibo, not really like a massive upset. Both of those teams were pretty close in terms of like perception. I would say both of them are relatively inconsistently great, but BLG has caught fire towards the back half of this split. They were really struggling in the early part of the split, especially that mid-jungle duo. It really felt like they had no chemistry, but Bin has been playing like an absolute monster in the playoffs so far, and Elkanon might be one of the top 1 or 2 bot lanes in the LPL at the current moment. They're just playing at a ridiculous high level in lane and out of lane, and so BLG is certainly not a team you can overlook. But JD Gaming getting their first action in the playoffs in this series. They finished first in the regular season for a reason. This is arguably the most stacked team talent-wise in the entire world. We're looking at, maybe 5, at the very minimum 4 players you can make a case for being the best player in their role in the entire world. At least last year you could certainly make that argument, but JDG hasn't always clicked on that level. They've been very feast or famine in the sense of sometimes they barely win, and other times they destroy you in like a combined 35 minutes. And so, not exactly sure which one we're going to get today. Hopefully we get a good series out of these 2, because I think both of them are really, really fun to watch. But the only way we're going to know is by going game by game and talking about what ended up happening. Of course, that means we're going to kick it off with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was JD Gaming. They are able to take the first game in this series. They're able to take a 1-0 series lead, which is, of course, really, really big for this team. And honestly, the momentum they're able to generate here is great. I think BLG being knocked down a peg in game number 1 is definitely important. They kind of ran through Weibo. They really haven't been tested almost at all over the course of these playoffs so far. RNG was not up for the task. Weibo was not up for the task. It's going to be definitely a little bit of a different story here with JDG, but this was a pretty back and forth game. It certainly wasn't a complete dominant showing from JDG. They definitely were a little bit, I would say, less proactive in the early game than a team like BLG, and they had to play from behind, but lucky for them, they've got a lot of really good players on the team that know where they need to be in the mid game and know exactly how to win games like this. So what ended up happening? Well, BLG was actually able to generate a pretty strong lead in the early game. It wasn't massive or anything, but we're talking like 3-4K across the first 10 minutes of the game, which is really nice. Elk gets dove for first blood in the bot lane, but he actually answers with a kill because Missing stayed under tower just a tad bit too long, which is massive for the side of BLG. And then Bin picks up 2 kills in the top lane, 2 different circumstances. He ends up, getting a gank from his jungler June to be able to kill 369 the first time, and then he just solo kills the Scion the second time. Not a lot of attention shown topside by JDG, and BLG was definitely willing to punish that. Bin is a player that really likes to receive resources, one of the few top laners in the LPL that actually does get a lot of jungle attention from his team, and JDG is almost the opposite. 369 has been on an island all year long, and honestly, I'm not surprised. I talked about this a lot in my preview video, my round 3 video when I previewed this series. I talked about how I thought Bin was going to have a little bit of an advantage in the early laning phase simply just because the team was going to invest in him more. And that definitely came to fruition in game number 1. BLG's bot lane continued to play well. They were able to pick up some really nice kills on their own, even with June roaming bot. A couple of really close fights, mainly at Second Dragon. Very, very back and forth, a 1-for-1 or a 2-for-2. One of those, I can't remember, but, you know, BLG still kind of maintaining that lead. It's all good for them until Knight finds that Flash ultimate. And as soon as he hits that Flash ultimate, it's like, oh, JDG wins the fight. They're able to take a massive, like, 3 or 4 for 0 fight. They're able to go get Baron. And all of a sudden, that gold lead that BLG had spent so long building up in the early game is just disintegrated. It's gone. JDG is then able to win basically every team fight from that point onwards in the game. They're able to control the objectives from that point. And they're just able to close it out. It's a really nice mid to late game coming out from JDG. They don't over push a lot of their advantages. There were times where it looked like, you know, maybe they could have ended, but they realized if they just wait 3 or 4 minutes for the next major objective to come up, they can end guaranteed because they know they can't lose a fight. And honestly, I'm just really impressed. This was a very controlled, very good performance from JDG. Not controlled in the way that I think a lot of the LCK games in the previous days' video were controlled, where they were just kind of slow. Like, I thought they could have ended and they didn't, but these were actually just, like, good plays coming out from JDG, recognizing that it's not worth flipping the game on a couple of these plays. And so, good on them. Player of the game for me is going to go to Knight in the mid lane because those anti-stuns were just absolutely absurd. I think a lot of people are going to give it to Ruler, and rightfully so. Ruler was absolutely massive in this game, but I think you could realistically give it to either. Knight was the one setting up Ruler, and so whoever you want to give the credit for in that instance, I totally understand, but Knight being super proactive in the mid game was, in my opinion, the only reason why JDG was able to get back here. Kanavi had gold, and he especially was able to get a lot of kills towards the back half of the game with those Viego resets. But Knight Flash ulting in that mid-game play right in bot river, if he doesn't do that, they lose the game. Like, if they don't get a move on pretty soon at that point, they don't really have a lot of ways to get back into it. It was on the onus of JDG to really create that play, and Knight absolutely went out and created that play. He was really good in the back half of the game, too. Maybe a little bit over-eager with some of the plays, but for the most part, like, he was the primary engager on the side of JDG, and he did his role to absolute perfection. But Ruler did the most damage in the game by a country mile. The dude was absolutely lighting up everybody in a team fight. He was out damaging Elk by a ridiculous amount. You just can't give Ruler Zeri. You know, I say that, but you just can't give Ruler, like, anything. This guy's just way too good at the game, but he was really good in team fights. He had the Lulu peeling for him. The Scion was really, really bad in laning phase. We already talked about how he died twice pretty early on in the game to give this Gwen a gold lead, but he was pretty useful towards the back half. Not only was he relatively tanky because he's Scion, but he did a really good job knowing exactly where he needed to be. I can remember a specific fight in the mid lane that kind of trailed down into bot river where he basically just zoned out Elk the entire fight, and the Lucian really didn't get to deal any sort of damage, and I think that's just a really big positive for JDG. Even a player who was losing in the early game was able to rebound. Kanavi was good, Missing was good. JDG just played the back half of this game really well, and there's not a lot of negatives I can give for them. BLG, on the other hand, I don't think they played this game all that badly. I think Bin was awesome in the early game, and so was Jun. Elkinon, I think, as well, had a really good early game. Unfortunately, they just couldn't translate that into teamfight success. They were just a little bit too passive in the mid-game, opening up opportunities for JD Gaming to try and initiate some of these fights that they were able to get. Bin was useless in a lot of these teamfights, and it wasn't particularly his fault. It's just kind of unfortunate how things ended up working out. The Annie really neutralized a lot of the pressure that Gwen, you know, generally speaking, should have in this game, and Jun just wasn't tanky enough to be able to survive the full engage, and, you know, from things like Viego and Zeri and Scion, there's just too much coming out on the other side for the CC coming out from Sejuani to mean too much. You needed this Jace, and you needed this Lucian to step up damage-wise, and unfortunately, they just were never going to be able to match their counterparts. My dud of the game is Yagao, if only just because I felt like he had the least impact on the game. I think Bin was really good in the early game, Jun was really good in the early game, but Yagao didn't have the highs or the lows. He wasn't necessarily the worst in every team fight, but, you know, when you look at, like, the grand scheme of the game, it felt like he had the least impact, I would say, on everything that went on. Not the worst game in the world, but certainly not, like, a great game considering what his counterpart on the other side was able to do. But JDG able to jump out to that 1-0 series lead. It was a game that BLG had control of, though, so they're going to be going into the locker room feeling pretty good. You know, I don't think the series is anywhere close to over. It's going to be interesting to see what ends up going on from here, but if JDG does take that 2-0 series lead, it's looking pretty dire for BLG at that point. You cannot afford to lose game 2. You do not want to have to win 3 games in a row against this JDG team. That is not going to be easy at all. And so a big game here for BLG, and a big one for JDG as well. But who's going to come out on top? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Bilibili Gaming. They are able to take game number 2 and tie up this series at 1 game apiece, which is, as we know, massive for these series. There has not been anybody in the world who has come back from 2-0 over the course of 2023 so far, and so or at least in a major region, maybe in a minor region. I haven't actually paid attention to that, but no one that I've covered on the channel has come back from 2-0 so far, so you definitely did not want to go down 2-0 to a team like JD Gaming, and you did it in a lot of the ways that you were able to do it in game number 1. You were just able to close it out a little bit more efficiently in this one. Now, first of all, we got to talk about draft because BLG basically got everything they wanted. This is the standard BLG comp. They get Bin on something that can be super impactful in team fights. Same thing with Elk, who can just kind of scale into the late game. But you've got the Kindred Galio. You've got this super death comp coming out. You've got June on one of the champions that is consistently banned against him in basically every game. And Yagao on the champion that he's probably been the most successful on across the year of 2023 so far. So this is exactly what you want to see if you're a BLG fan. You want to see them going back to comfort. You want to see them playing the things that they feel good about. And trust me, they felt good about this comp. Early game very much went the way of BLG. Kindred was so aggro because he knew he had the advantage from the lanes. Yagao in particular was always willing to kind of just abandon mid and move with him, and so you see him invading Kanavi a lot. He ends up getting first blood onto Kanavi on a nice invade timing. You know, Kanavi was really low in the jungle. Jun knew he would be, and so really, really good job there coming out from the Kindred. But even outside of that, some really good fights in the bot lane. He's able to fight really well in the mid lane, picking up kills on Ruler and on Knight and on basically everybody on the side of JDG to generate this really strong lead for BLG. This is kind of similar to what they had in game 1, but I would say this lead was a little bit stronger, mostly because it felt like their comp scaled a little bit better into the late game. I have a lot of faith that Kennen Aphelios is going to be able to accentuate a lot of what this Kindred is going to be able to do in these team fights. JDG does try similar things to what they tried in game 1 to get back into the game. Some really good stuns coming out from Annie, some really good like ult stuns, combos, whatever you want to call them, coming out from Knight. Unfortunately, it's just not nearly as effective as it was in game number 1 because you don't have the same kind of follow-up. Ruler on the Lucian is not nearly the same kind of damage that Zeri was offering. And Kanavi, quite frankly, was kind of bad this game, and he was just going way too deep on a lot of these engages. We'll talk about that in a bit, but JDG trying the same plays, it wasn't necessarily working out in the same way. 15 minutes, it felt like the game was pretty much completely over. They were able to land some picks in the mid-game onto Jun, I believe at like 18 minutes, and then another at like 22 minutes into the game, they were able to land some picks onto Shun, but there really wasn't a lot they could actually do with it. They could never win a front-to-back team fight. There was just too much damage coming out on the side of BLG. Eventually, Elk gets super online on this Aphelios, and the team fights are legitimately impossible, and they end up losing the game. But credit to BLG. Like, they played really, really, really good in this one. Jun's obviously going to get player of the game. I think some people might give it to Elk for his contributions towards the back half. I think Broadcast gave it to Bin on the Kennen, which I do understand. I mean, he was absolutely bursting people down towards the back half, but Jun was the one that really stood out to me as the playmaker in this game. You can talk about Bin going deathless in this one as a kind of a proponent as to why he should get player of the game, but to me, Jun was creating a lot of the advantages that the rest of the team was able to capitalize on in the first place, and so it would feel pretty wrong to not give him the player of the game. The Kindred definitely was the story in the early game that created the lead that BLG then used to get over the hump. If you want that late game carry, Elk was that late game carry. As good as Bin was, I mean, go watch Elk in a lot of these team fights. His positioning is immaculate. He's just so good. I'm really glad he's on a good team and he gets the chance to really prove how good he is at the game of League of Legends. Last year was a little bit of a fever dream for a lot of fans because they had to see Elk on Ultra Prime, and that was just never going to be a good thing. But back on a team that can actually compete here in BLG, and he's playing like a top 1, 2, 380 carry in the entire world at his absolute peak. And so, you know, credit to Ben. It's not like he was bad, and credit to Yagao and On, who all went deathless in this game, but BLG just in general was really, really strong, and their team fighting towards the back half was pretty phenomenal. As for JDG, some questions have started to arise with how the combination of games 1 and 2 have gone. You lost early game in both games, which is not particularly good. This team isn't necessarily known as like the dominating early game team. You can check their stats for that, but I also talked about that a lot throughout the season. What they're really good at is these mid-game skirmishes. They are probably the best team in the world at the mid-game skirmishes. They just don't really lose them. If they're able to generate a lead in the early game, that's almost supplementary to what they're able to do in the mid-game because they play so well from neutral. But unfortunately, this game, a lot of the plays they ended up going for, they just didn't have the resources to be able to make work. Kanavi's going to get my dud of the game. He was pretty miserable in this one. He's not really been the Kanavi that we all know and love in 2023. He's been good. Certainly, he hasn't been bad, but he's not been like a top 1 or 2 or 3 jungler in the LPL, which I do think is a little bit frustrating, but you know, it's okay. He can still rebound. We know Kanavi has a ton of talent. This was just a pretty poor Lee Sin game that got off the rails really early on from some really good plays coming out from Shun and Yagao. Knight was not so good in this game in terms of positioning. I didn't want to give him dud of the game because he actually landed some super crucial stuns that, you know, in a different circumstance could have absolutely affected this game incredibly positively for JDG. It's just unfortunate that the circumstance wasn't quite there. He was out of position a lot. He died 2 or 3 times throughout this game to just not being with his team, which is very frustrating. I usually make fun of a lot of junglers for that. That's a pretty jungle-heavy trade, I would say, but Knight was definitely looking for flanks this game, and it was not working out. Ruler and Missing just weren't nearly as impressive in the early game. They're going to need to step up and start being a little bit more aggro, I would say, towards the early half of the game in order to be able to generate those leads, especially if they want to play something like Lucian Nami into Aphelios Lulu, and then 369 was just bodied in the top lane matchup. Bin had so much control over that lane, was up like 40 CS. It's Cho'Gath into Kennen. It's going to happen, right? Like, I'm not particularly surprised, but overall, JDG definitely not looking quite as dominant. Now, this has happened throughout the season before. JDG has dropped a couple of games here and there, and then they always seem to find a way to bounce back. That could definitely be the case here, but BLG is certainly not a team that you can take lightly at this point. Their early games have been generally phenomenal throughout the playoffs, and especially in this series so far, and it is clear that they have found a playstyle that they feel comfortable with. It's on the onus of JDG to take them off of that at this point. So, is BLG going to be able to take that 2-1 series lead, or is JDG going to prove that Game 2 was just them getting the champions that they were best at? Well, the winner of game number 3 was BLG. They are able to take game number 3, and they're able to take control of this series by going up 2-1. They've put JDG on series point now, moving into the rest of this series, and this is a massive win for a BLG squad that very much wanted the momentum coming out of this game. Again, they get back to a style that they feel comfortable on. They basically force JDG into this comp that really relies on a lot of early game pressure, and they're able to win every single late game fight. This is just an impressive showing coming out from BLG, and considering how game 1 went as well, like, we were potentially one play away from this being a 3-0 on the side of BLG with how things have gone, but really, really good stuff coming out from them. What ended up happening in this game? Well, BLG really wanted to invest a lot into top lane, and JDG clearly was a little bit worried about that because they felt like they had to bring pressure top lane as soon as 369 started getting absolutely dominated by the Jax. This has been a huge point of strength for BLG, basically the entire series so far. Bin has just been the better top laner by such a considerable margin that it is really a problem for JDG, and honestly, I'm kind of surprised to see it. You know, 369 Gragas is always a little bit of a meme, as we all know, but I'm still surprised to see Bin be able to dominate in such a way. He was able to get a lot of pressure early. They end up having a 3v3 on the top side as well that goes in favor of BLG, and it's just like, man, top side is just constantly in favor of BLG, and the pressure there is immense, not to mention the fact that Elkin get Xayah and Rakan. Little bit of an aside, how has Xayah fallen through the first 2 games, like, not picked or banned? This champion is so ridiculous right now, in my opinion, and El clearly plays her at a ridiculously high level. Of course, she's better with Rakan, and they did ban out the Rakan in the first couple of games, but I still don't think it's worth, like, not picking Xayah. Like, she's just really, really strong, and I think we're gonna see that in the back half of these team fights, and honestly, I'll just get to that now. Elk was a madman in this game, an absolute maniac on this Xayah. He was doing a ridiculous amount of damage in all of these fights. Basically, every front-to-back team fight was just BLG won almost immediately because of the damage that was coming out from Xayah. Now, that's not to take away from some of the players on JDG. Knight, in particular, I thought had a pretty good game on the Jace. Definitely a much better game than he had in game 2 on the Annie, but Elk was just untouchable in this game. He had great peel. Yagao had some really good event horizons to be able to catch a lot of people out. And Bin was following up by diving onto the backline, you know, add on to that Rakan and Wukong, and there's just way too much assistance for the Xayah here to be able to deal with her once she got as far ahead as she was into this game. And so, really, really good stuff coming out from BLG. Elk is going to get my player of the game in this one. No surprise there. He's probably been the best player in this series through the first 3 games. He's just been incredibly consistent. He's good in lane. He's been able to win, I would say, the 2v2 rather consistently. And then, moving into the late game, like team fights, he's been the best team fighter across both teams, and that's been the most impressive part for me. That's what your job is, for the most part, as an AD carry. Obviously, winning early, you know, is good, but it's good in the sense that it helps you get to that power spike where you can start to take over the game just a little bit quicker. And so good for Elk. Really, really good series. He's proven to the world at this point that he is a top 1 or 2 AD carry in the LPL. I really don't even see how it's arguable at this point. As good as players like Gala are, like, Elk just has this takeover instinct that I think is a little bit above, like, what your average AD carry throws out. He is making a case to be a top 3 AD carry in the entire world right now. He really has been that good. On has been really good across these playoffs as well, and in this series, he's been solid. A lot of really good engages coming out from him, but for the most part, those two are just kind of chilling until it's time for them to take over in team fights. Yagao had a really good game on the Vigar. Jun had some decent engages, I would say, on the Wukong. Did get caught out a little bit more than I would have expected him to in this jungle position, but the rest of the team was so strong that it really did make up for it. As for JDG on the other side, dead of the game's going to go to 369. I mean, this has been a disaster in the top lane for JDG. A big reason why they're down 2-1 in this series is because 369 has been a disaster in the top lane throughout this series so far. Obviously, I predicted Bin to be able to have the advantage. You can hear that in my preview section of the previous video, but you know, I did not expect 369 to lose like this. I honestly thought top lane was going to be a little bit more irrelevant. You know, Bin might be able to generate leads, but 369 not exactly the player to give over a ton of those leads. That has not been the case. I mean, 369 has been very susceptible to a lot of interference in this series so far, and that's going to be a big issue for JDG if that continues. Bin is a good enough player to be able to take advantage of that, and BLG is plenty smart enough as a team to be able to, you know, kind of take advantage of some of his mispositioning mistakes. And so if 369 doesn't get his shit together, I would say in the next couple of games, it's going to be a little bit of a problem. Like I said, I thought Knight actually played relatively well in this game, especially in the mid game. He was actually able to generate a lot of gold onto this Jace. He was 3-0, 4-0 at one point in this game. Unfortunately, nobody else on the team was able to do anything, and Jace can't solo win fights, especially against a Xayah with Peel, and so there's really just not a lot he can do. Ruler and Missing haven't particularly stepped up this series so far. Ruler is someone who has gotten a lot of flack for maybe being like a quote-unquote Zeri one-trick. Obviously, anybody who's watched Ruler for like any amount of time knows that's not true. Like, it literally takes like maybe 3 games of Ruler to realize that that's not true, but, you know, the narrative's going to persist unless he comes out and has a really good game on a different champion, and so it's going to be interesting to see what they end up going to in game number 4, but, you know, Kanavi not playing great, 369 not playing great, Ruler not playing great. JDG looks very susceptible right now, and, you know, it is time for BLG to step up and kind of take control. If they're able to win game 4, they're going to be able to knock JDG down to that lower bracket, and they're going to be moving on to winners finals, which would be massive for the 5 seed, but they still have to beat JDG. Nothing is set in stone. So is BLG going to be able to close out this series, or is JDG going to take us to a Silver Scribes game 5? Well, the winner of game number 4 was JD Gaming. They are able to take game number 4, and they're able to keep this series alive for them. We are moving to a game number 5 now, but before we get ahead of ourselves, before we talk about what's going to happen in that game 5, it's time to talk about what happened in this game number 4 that ended in us getting that game number 5. Well, JDG probably had the most dominant game of the series, of anybody so far. BLG was really good in game 3, but this JDG game 4 was really, really solid. It's exactly what you wanted to see as a bounce back. A couple of hiccups in the early game, but for the most part, it didn't even really matter. They were getting so much on other parts of the map, even when certain members of their team weren't playing all that well, that it more than made up for any mistakes that were being made by this team. But let's go ahead and go over what happened. A lot of pressure top lane from BLG. What's new? I mean, this has kind of been a theme in this series. Bin really wants to get ahead. He solo kills 369 at like 6 minutes into the game. I don't even know how this is possible. Like, just play safe on Sion. Like, just don't die and you'll be fine. Sion then ends up in the enemy jungle. He ends up being taken down by Yagao, and all of a sudden he's 0-2, and BLG have a bit of gold on their solo laners for free. However, JDG does answer back relatively well. While all of this is going on, they're just getting a lot of gold and a lot of pressure into the bot side. They're securing dragons, they're securing pressure on that side of the map, basically just flipping it, knowing that Sion's not going to be all that useful in this game. If they can get the Zeri online, they know they're going to be fine. Oh yeah, did I mention Ruler got Zeri? Oops. That's not a good idea if you're BLG. And it turned out to be a really bad idea once we get into the teamfight stage of the game. Our middle dragons, second dragon, third dragon, big fights around both of them, and both of those fights go in favor of JDG. It's that third dragon fight in particular where Ruler really gets to pop off. He ends up getting 3 kills there, really starts to separate JDG. That's where they're able to establish their giant lead. And then once we get to the Baron fights, Ruler ends up getting a Quadra on Zeri, and the game is over. There's just no way to fight at that point. Knight plays unreal on the Ahri towards the back half. Even 369's having some good moments, and JDG's able to close it out relatively efficiently. It basically ended as soon as Ruler got gold. And so overall, like, a good game from JDG. It's really hard to find like really critical points of them in this game because yes, their top laner was bad, right? And yes, you know, BLG was getting a lot of pressure on that side and they were able to generate a bit of gold, but for the most part, like, they were trading it for things that meant a lot more. They were trading it for dragons, they were trading it for bot pressure, which is just more valuable by like a lot than whatever Sion is going to be able to give you in the top lane. So that was good. I think Kanavi had probably his best game of the series in game number 4. Jungle has not necessarily been a strength for JDG across this series so far, but this game was a lot more controlled coming out from Kanavi. Just good plays, not exactly exactly making, these big flash plays, but, just going in and being relatively efficient on the Wukong. He's had some bad moments, I would say, over the course of the series, getting caught out and, being in situations that he doesn't necessarily need to be in. It was good to see him be a little bit more influential in terms of actively making good plays for his team rather than just kind of being an accessory to everything else going on. But at the end of the day, it's still about the two best players on this team. It's about Knight, it's about Ruler. Ruler's player of the game on the Zeri. He ends up getting 10 kills in this game, and his positioning is just so aggro on this champion. It's almost unfair to give it to him at this point. It has to be a permaban against JD Gaming. Like, you cannot afford to give Ruler Zeri. He's going to win the game. I hear a lot of people say that, like, JDG can't win without Zeri. I think that is incorrect. I think we gotta flip that on its head. I think JDG can't lose with Zeri. It's not necessarily that they cannot win without Zeri, right? Because they've won plenty of games this year without Zeri, and Ruler has been a top tier AD carry in the world for many years, even before Zeri was released. But when they do get Zeri, it's just game over, right? Like, there just is no way to get past that. This is a must ban against JDG, and I think BLG unfortunately had to learn that the hard way. And then Knight was really good towards the back half of this game. He's just so aggressive, and he's so clinical, I would say, on this Ahri. He's able to create plays that I just don't think a lot of other players are able to create on that champion, and it's really, really good stuff coming out from him. Those two are definitely the standouts, in my opinion, from JDG, but Missing continued to play really, really well. This was probably his best game of the series on the Lulu, and Kanavi was good in the jungle as well, and so good stuff from JDG. As for BLG on the other side, not as good. I mean, losing pressure in the early game, it's the first time that's really happened in this series, so I'm willing to give you a little bit of a pass for that. Ben was still really good in the early game, and Yagao was able to pick up a free kill onto the Scion, but outside of that, I don't even think you really made a play at all this game. You were trying to contest some of the dragons, but you were never really going to be able to fight once that Zeri got ahead, and it felt like you knew that. It felt like after third dragon, like, your brains just shut off. You stopped trying. Bot lane in particular just stopped going for these crazy plays. They were playing really, really passive, kind of just playing to lose, if I'm being entirely honest, and it's not exactly a great sign to see that. My dud of the game's going to go to Elk in the bot lane. He was awesome in game 3, and he didn't exactly make, like, gigantic errors in game number 4. It's not like he was, like, walking up and dying for no reason. He just did, like, no damage comparatively to the rest of his team and to the enemy team, more importantly. He was just kind of useless this game. I think you could realistically give it to On as well, but definitely kind of a down game for the BLG bot lane. I'm definitely willing to overlook it and kind of excuse it a bit because they've been so good over the course of this series so far, and over the course of the playoffs just in general, but certainly worth noting, Ruler gets his champion, and Elk is unfortunately not able to go toe-to-toe with him, just like the case was in game number 1. June was just out-jungled this game. Ben was strong, I thought, on the Jax. He was able to create plays for the team, just not much to be able to do with it. BLG definitely did not want to be here, but we're here now. We're moving on to game number 5. It is win or go to lower bracket here in the playoffs. Is the number 1 seed going to be moved down to lower bracket in their first series, or is BLG's miracle hype run going to come to an end to a JDG team that has finally found its footing? Well, the winner of game number 5 was JD Gaming. They are able to take game number 5, and they're able to take this incredibly close series 3-2. A very, very fun series coming out from both of these teams. Neither really has a lot to be ashamed of. This was an incredibly close game, and honestly, JDG's gonna feel very lucky to be walking out with a win. There is a real argument to be made that at least at one point in time, in all 5 of these games, BLG probably should have won. And that says a lot about BLG. It says a bit about JD Gaming as well, but both for good and for bad, because this team has showed that not only are they able to win games, they're able to take down BLG, but they're able to kind of keep their wits about them. They're not going to get tilted. They're not going to lose focus. They're not going to stop trying to make plays to win. And that, to me, is just as impressive as any dominating victory coming out from JD Gaming could have been in this series. To see the resilience and the perseverance coming out from this team is a very, very good thing. But we have to talk about BLG, because this game really was entirely theirs to lose, and unfortunately, they lost it. Really good early game coming out from them. A big surprise, I'm going to say something that you've never heard before, but BLG invested in top lane, and Ben started bullying 369. OMG, how is this possible? I didn't think this could ever happen in a series like this. Every single game, it felt like BLG was like, well, we'll just get Ben ahead in the top lane, and they did that. June was top lane a lot. He was dropping Herald. He was going up there for kills. They were diving the Renekton. There really just wasn't a lot 369 could do, and while I do feel bad for him, like, there wasn't really a lot he could do in this circumstance. I don't necessarily blame him in the same way that I did in a lot of the earlier games of this series. This wasn't him taking bad trades. This wasn't him pushing up farther than expected. This was just BLG investing a ridiculous amount of resources into trying to shut down this Crocodile. And, you know, spoiler alert, it didn't work. Like, he was still incredibly useful towards the back half of the game, and that's great resilience, especially after how this series has gone for 369. But, you know, BLG do a really good job generating that lead in the top lane. And then we have a dive bot lane that JDG go for. They really want to try and take advantage of this bot advantage that they're going to have if June is going to spend a lot of time on top side. But a really good counter on the BLG bot dive. We end up getting another really good play with Bin down in the bot lane where it looks like he like fully overcommits, where he's playing way too aggro. He goes in on 4 members of JDG and dies basically instantly. But that CC is long enough to allow BLG to follow up and end up turning it into like a 4-for-1. And they're sitting on like a 3 or 4K gold lead going into 15 minutes. This is absolutely massive. They're team fighting well. They have control of the map. They're getting objectives. It just looks like a net positive. This looks like BLG's game to lose. Like I said, it kind of was BLG's game to lose, but things start to fall apart during a really bad engage in the mid lane, and this is really where things start to get catastrophic. Bin teleports into the jungle, tries to get a flank, misses his full engage, and then goes all the way in and has to stopwatch immediately so that Galio can ult him. And then, you know, BLG do okay in the fight, but, you know, Elk mispositions a little bit. He goes a little bit too aggro without the items to really back it up. June plays really, really bad. He actively sabotages his team with the ultimate there. Like, there are just a lot of misplays. I've seen a lot of finger pointing in, you know, YouTube comments and in Reddit threads and on Twitter. I've seen a lot of finger pointing as to, it was this player's fault. No, it was this one player's fault. The reason that this happened is because multiple players messed up. There is not one player who messed up more than the other in this exchange. Yes, maybe some were more obvious and maybe some were slightly more egregious, but, you know, if all of them do what they're supposed to do, then this goes fine, right? Like, if at least a couple of them play it right, like, it probably goes fine. Unfortunately, this team fight was miserably bad. It just was not very good from the side of BLG, and it really opened up a space for JDG to get back into the game, which they do. They go ahead and they take the Baron. They win the Baron fight, and then from basically even gold, they just end the game. They power through the base. You know, even the commentators are like, they probably can't end here. They do go ahead and end here, which is impressive stuff coming out from JDG, realizing that they are on a bit of a timer and just saying, screw it, we're going to go for the end right now, and they end up getting it. Really good stuff coming out from JDG, and they are able to move on to upper bracket finals, which is massive for this team. It didn't feel like it should be in doubt. You know, JDG is one of those teams that you don't want to doubt, but they're also a team that has definitely struggled at points in the regular season. It's good to see them overcome some weaknesses in the early game that they kind of showed throughout the entirety of the series. That's certainly a concern when you're going against other teams that have really good early games. Perhaps they can be taken advantage of, but the resilience that they were able to show, being able to come back in both games games 2 and game 5 is really impressive stuff. A lesser team would have just fallen. This would have been a 3-0 if JDG wasn't as good as they are, but the fact that they were able to turn this into a 3-2 just shows you that they are talented enough to get over the hump. Knight's going to be my player of the game. He's also going to be my player of the series for JD Gaming. He was just very consistent over the course of this series. Outside of game 2, and even in game 2, like, he had some really good stuns. Knight had no negatives, I would say, throughout the entirety of this series. Even in the losses in games 2 and 3, it felt like he was at least out there trying to make plays. He was definitely the ace, or whatever you want to call it, on the side of JDG, if you want to follow the OP.GG terms. He was really, really good in that game 3, and then 1, 4, and 5 were all him. Like, he's so good at Syndra. We talk about it all the time. He's just simply the best Syndra in the world, and it's not particularly close. There's just nobody who can even go toe-to-toe with him on that champion, and I know there was a lot of conversation about Ruler not being able to win games outside of Zeri. I just completely disagree with that. I don't want to harp on it, because I already talked about it in the previous game. This team cannot lose with Zeri, but they can win without it, right? Like, that's the kind of situation we're in. Ruler was doing a lot of good damage in those team fights that really mattered towards the back half of the game. Missing on an engager, I think, is definitely back to comfort level for him. Same thing with On the other side, and so interesting to see Leona Nautilus be inevitable in the end. And then Kanavi had one of his more proactive games of the series. This in game 4, I think you could toss up which one was better, but he definitely was a little bit more flashy in this one. Overall, just a good game from JDG, a really good comeback, and certainly a confidence booster to be able to walk out of the series with the win. But for BLG, it's got to feel oh so close. You were oh so close to being able to take down the #1 seeded JDG in this series. You just weren't able to finish it off which is just unfortunate. Bin's gonna get my dud of the game if only because his late game team fighting was bad, but he was still really strong in the early game, and I think everybody had their moments. Elk was a little bit bad in those team fights as well, certainly wasn't doing the same kind of damage you needed him to, but maybe if he had just a little bit more gold, then he would have been able to pull off some of the plays that he made. Jun and Yagao went back to not feeling like they were on the same page with a lot of the engages, especially Jun's ultimates. He's so good at this Kindred champion, and he just wasn't able to pull it off, and then like I said, Bin's Camille was just not particularly perfect, but this team's not out. Remember, we're still in upper bracket here, so BLG losing sends them to lower bracket. They're the first team in the LPL to head to lower bracket in 2023. They're going to be fine there. It's going to be a really intriguing matchup. Of course, they will play the loser of the series that we're going to cover in just a second, but they're not out of the water just yet. This team absolutely still has the opportunity to not only make finals, but to make MSI, and with the way that they played in this series, I certainly wouldn't count it out. And then for JDG, they're going to play the winner of the series that we're going to talk about next, but, you know, I know a lot of people are going to harp on the fact that they didn't necessarily look perfect in this series. I think there are a lot of positives to take away, even if there are negative ones as well. But now that we finished up our first series of round number 4, it's time to head into our second series. And this one, if you thought series 1 was an interesting matchup, this one is really intriguing, especially with some of the teams taken out on the way to this matchup. We have the number 2 seeded Edward Gaming making their playoff debut against the number 6 seeded OMG. Incredibly excited to see this matchup. I did not expect OMG to be here. BLG was a little bit of an upset over Weibo. I thought Weibo, you know, should have had that series, you know, in terms of matchup. You know, I think they were the better team on paper, but BLG obviously just performing better. But at the end of the day, like, it wasn't a big enough difference for me to consider it an upset. I think a lot of people are looking at OMG versus LNG as a bit of an upset. Of course, if you follow the channel, you'll disagree with that because you'll know that I've been not only lower on LNG as a playoff team in general, I don't think that their style necessarily adapts to best of fives all that well, but I've been high on OMG for what, 3 years now? They've been probably the channel darling of the LPL since I started doing these weekly recaps, and so not really a huge surprise to see them here for me in the top 4, but maybe for a lot of other people, they are really overperforming expectations. As for this particular matchup, I like OMG, but I do think that they have a particularly bad matchup into a team like EDG. What does OMG do really well? They team fight really, really well. They're very coordinated. They're very cohesive. They are a unit. They play above the sum of their parts because they play so well as a group. And a lot of that I think you can attribute to the addition of PP God here in spring. Every single team that he has gone to, with the exception of BLG, which felt like a cursed org up until this split, got better macro-wise because he was there, and got better in general because he was there. And so, you know, he obviously has some special sauce. Our Lord and Savior kind of sprinkles around everywhere. I probably shouldn't have said that when his name is PP God, but it's fine, I guess. Anyways, their macro is really good. Their macro is incredibly solid and incredibly consistent. Aki, in particular, has really taken a step up in terms of being able to control the map. Cream is incredibly talented. Shanji has been dominating in the playoffs in the top side so far, and Abel's mechanical growth has finally evolved into a way where he can turn it into his entire game and not just good team fights, right? OMG's clicking, but EDG was just so dominant in the regular season. You could say they were the most consistent team in the LPL in the regular season, and I wouldn't argue that even a little bit. They're coming into the playoffs as the number 2 seed, but I honestly say they have the highest floor of any team in the LPL, in my opinion. You've got a ton of players here that are actively playing at a really high level. Ale might have been the best top laner in the LPL. Jeje was, in my opinion, the best jungler in the LPL. Fofo was near the top of mid. Leave was the best rookie in the entire league, and Mako was certainly a top 2, top 3 support in the entire league. And so, where's the weakness? They don't really have one. There's not really a lot of ways to take advantage of them. Teams in the past have been able to generate slight early leads against them because they do like to play a little bit more for scaling, but, you know, OMG is a team that also prefers to scale. They're not really all that proficient at being able to push the tempo super early on in the game. If they're going to win, it's usually going to be later on in games, and so it's an interesting matchup, but I definitely favored EDG in this one. I think I had EDG 3-1, EDG 3-0. I thought that they definitely should be able to take it on paper, but OMG is certainly not a team that you can completely count out. They've already proven that in both of their previous series, but let's go ahead and talk about what ended up happening game by game, starting, of course, with game number 1. And game number 1 was an OMG win. They are able to take a win in the opening game of the series. A massive win here again. Momentum is so crucial in these best of fives. Being able to jump out to an early lead already puts the enemy team on the back foot, and it gives you that momentum to be able to play some more aggressive styles than maybe what you're used to. But this game in particular was very back and forth. This was actually pretty similar to what we just saw in game 5 of the previous series, where it was one team kind of dominating the early game, really feeling like they have all the pressure in the world, until one singular play goes wrong for them and the entire game flips. This time, instead of BLG making a mistake that lets JDG back into the game, it's OMG making one of the most proactive plays that I've seen in such a long time in order to basically force the game to go into their favor. A wonderful game coming out from them. Let's talk about it moment by moment. The early game was defined by EDG. Like, they were dominant at the beginning of this, and usually when EDG wins in the early game, they cruise to victories because of how consistent they are towards the back half of games. Mako was making some really good plays in the bot lane on the Leona, some really nice initiations, a really good catch in the river to get Aki around second dragon. You're really controlling all the tempo in this game. You're able to control a lot of the team fights, a lot of the objectives. You may not be getting them, but you're at the very least like pressuring them, and you're certainly gaining a lot of towers on the map, if not getting, you know, the dragons. You're in control. You're 3-4K gold up at about 15-20 minutes into the game. But then 20-21 minutes hit, and OMG makes what I can only describe as genuinely one of the single best calls that anyone has made in the playoffs in any region up until this point. They just go for Baron. They say, screw it. I mean, we're down 4K gold. We're going to force Baron, and we're going to make EDG do something because they're playing a little bit slower than we would like them to. So they start the Baron, the balls that they have on to go ahead and make that play. And EDG walks up. They're not really expecting OMG to be there, and so they're kind of uncoordinated when they try to contest this, and OMG immediately capitalizes, going in and basically getting a 4-for-0 as well as Baron, as well as Dragon, and it's like, oh my god, now the gold is even, and OMG is ahead in terms of stats. It's an unbelievable call that immediately, like literally in 1 second, completely turns around the entire game. The ability of that team to, within those 15 seconds, make so many split-second decisions that all lead to them, you know, coming out on top, and you needed to make all of them. It just goes to show how good this team's macro has gotten. They're able to win every team fight from that point onwards. They get the Ocean Soul. They, you know, Abel's able to team fight on the back really well, but Aki and Cream are really the big standouts here, and OMG's able to take game 1 in what is a phenomenal game for them. This is OMG playing at their absolute peak. Would you have liked to have seen them be a little bit more competitive in the early game? Probably, but they were able to get objectives, and they were trading things at least for a purpose, and then when it really came down to it, they made the best play they possibly could and did everything right and came back and won this game. There's a lot of negativity surrounding League of Legends in general. I've already combated that a bit in the JDG BLG series, where it feels like a lot of people like to point fingers instead of talk about the things that teams are doing well. I don't know how you talk about anything other than OMG just making an awesome play here. They deserve to win. My player of the game is going to go to Aki in the jungle. He was sensational in this game. Made a couple of errors in the early game. That kick in the topside river fight definitely comes to mind, but outside of that, like, no mistakes in the back half, and especially when they needed him the most, he was doing super well. He was level 17 in that final fight of the game, which is ginormous. I mean, how do you even get to level 17? How do you get 3 levels up as a jungler? Like, how is that even possible? Good for Aki. He played so well towards the back half of the game, and then Cream is the other player you really got to shout out, man. I know Namera says, like, no Everfrost on Ahri. I know that's become a very popular take, but Everfrost did a lot of freaking work in this game, man. He just plays so aggro. He's super willing to go up into somebody's face, full combo Everfrost them, and then just burst them down and kill them. He knows how to position really well. He's not scared at all because he knows his team has his back. When Aki and Cream are on the same page like this, like they were in the regular season at times, this team is genuinely unbeatable in team fights. They really are that good. Abel has great positioning. PP got with some phenomenal engages, and Shanji really made no mistakes throughout the game. It was just a really good OMG win. Really no negatives to give out other than the early game, which, quite frankly, was never their strength to begin with. As for EDG on the other side, gotta be a frustrating game to lose. You really wanted to walk out of this one with a win, but you know, obviously you showed some good things. Being able to generate a lead in the early game was solid. I thought Ale, obviously, in the top lane was incredibly good. The Fiora was ridiculously far ahead. She had a ridiculous amount of gold, and she really could have changed that game. There was even a big prevailing thought during that Baron fight where it ended up being like a 5v2 after OMG, I should say, took down the first 3 members of EDG. Ale was kind of dancing with them, and there was a very real possibility that if they slipped up, that Fiora could have won that fight. That's how far ahead Ale was at that point in the game, but unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. I also thought Mako made some good plays. Like, I know his scoreline looks garbage, but he was a really big part of the early game, and yes, he got caught out a couple of times, but, you know, that's kind of going to happen on Leona, and I think a lot of the engages were a big reason why they were able to generate such a strong lead in the first place, getting those catches onto Abel, onto Aki in the early game to be able to generate that lead, but nobody else was really all that impactful towards the back half of the game. My dud of the game's going to go to Jeje in the jungle. Being down 3 levels in the jungle is just not very good when you end the game. Lee Sin didn't even have all that much pressure in the early game. Jeje did a really good job being able to generate that early lead, but the impact of the Wukong in the late game was non-existent, and I think that was a big reason why they really weren't able to do a whole lot towards the back half of this game. But EDG definitely has a blueprint of how to win this series now. OMG not exactly showing us something we didn't already know, but they are showing us that they can do it at a level that maybe we thought wasn't exactly possible for them. So EDG hopefully going to come back in game 2, make this series interesting, but OMG could very quickly jump out to a 2-0 series lead here and get really close to punching their ticket to upper finals, which would be insane. But, you know, that's getting ahead of ourselves. We got to talk about game number 2, and the winner of game number 2 was EDG. Edward Gaming is able to pick up that game number 2 win and even up our series at 1 apiece. Super big win from them. If they weren't going to get this, it probably wasn't going to happen a lot today. It's very difficult to win 3 games in a row in the playoffs, especially being down 0-2. You don't want to put yourself into that kind of predicament, and luckily for EDG, they didn't do that. They set themselves up into a position where they could actually play the series from relative even, but this game was actually really similar to the first one. Not quite as skewed as I think the first one was, where OMG really made that one play to kind of put everything on its head. In this one, it very much was more even up until that point, and then each team kind of traded having a little bit of the momentum towards the back half of the game, but EDG the one to come out on top this time because of their superstar young rookie AD carry that I've been super high on even since before he played his first LPL game in Leave. I was talking about him in the preseason as somebody to watch out for, as, you know, arguably the best choice for biggest rookie in the LPL, someone who I thought was going to turn into a superstar one day. I think I might have been a little bit right about that one. Not that it was like a crazy take at the time. The dude was just so nuts in the LDL when I watched his tape that it felt inevitable that he was going to be really good on a really good EDG team. I just didn't think it was going to be so quick. Leave, like, has just been unbelievable. He's been a top 3 AD carry in the LPL so far in 2023. Certainly been in that category. And I think that that's just insane from somebody who is a rookie. And so, big credit to him. We'll go ahead and talk about what ends up happening in this game. But it's a really back and forth early game. You know, for every one good play EDG makes, OMG makes another good play. JJ gets first blood, and OMG get caught being a little bit too aggressive in the bot lane. Abel and PP got just a little bit too far forward, and they end up getting punished for that. But OMG actually has a huge fight around third dragon, where Abel on that Zeri ends up getting a ton of gold, and that game stays very active because of that. There is a little bit of a gold lead for EDG. I'm talking like 2, 3K as we fluctuate throughout this game, even though the fights aren't going in their favor. A lot of that is top lane. A lot of that is Ale being able to generate a really strong lead himself. And a lot of that gold is also on Viego in the jungle. You know, Jeje has a skin on this champion for a reason. He's very, very good on him, but we end up getting to a point in the game where EDG just feel like they have to start brute forcing it. They do have that gold lead, even if fights haven't been going entirely in their favor, so they just start playing super bullying. Super bully-ish, I guess is the word I would use, to try and force OMG off of these plays. They find one target and they go all in, they try and separate, they try to create these misnumbered plays, and they try to get objectives, and for the most part, they're doing it really, really well. Unfortunately, Baron becomes a little bit of a problem for EDG. OMG actually steals it, Cream goes into the pit and is able to steal it. Cream ends up dying, I believe Aki ends up dying there as well, but they do get the Baron, and that's good enough, and then once everybody's up, they have to go and defend because EDG is trying to, you know, push with the numbers advantage that they were able to generate in that fight, and unfortunately for EDG, they just go too deep. A phenomenal engage coming out from PP God on this recon, and able to clean up a bunch of the kills there to basically even out the gold. They go down and push into mid inhibitor, and it's like, oh my god, this is literally a completely even game going into Elder Dragon, which is insane because EDG is still up like 5 or 6 kills. Just really impressive stuff again coming out from OMG, showing the resilience and the ability to stay alive in this one, but unfortunately for OMG, the Elder fight is where everything goes wrong. They do basically everything in their power to kill Ale in that fight because they absolutely need to on the Kennen, or else they're going to be entirely shredded. But you know who that leaves? That leaves Leave. And man, does he just pop off. He goes literally melee mode with red-white and just kind of dominates the fight, is able to kill everybody, is able to heal up to full, basically of his own volition. And obviously with the Lulu ultimate, it's absolutely massive. Just major stuff coming out from this EDG AD carry, and they're able to end the game off of that. So really good stuff coming out from Leave. He's player of the game. Pretty easy choice here. I was kind of interested and curious to see how he was going to perform in his first ever playoffs in the LPL. Spoiler alert, he's doing pretty darn good. He's definitely living up to the hype so far. Want to give a lot of credit to the rest of his team, though. Really good peel coming out from the side of EDG. This is what you want to see at a pro level from one of the top teams, is the understanding of when to go in and when to sit back and peel for the AD carry that is going to win you the fight. I want to give a ton of props to Ale in particular in this game, because a lot of Kennons are just naturally going to look for flanks. They're going to look for opportunities to get onto the back line and to try to ult as many people as possible. Ale understood that that wasn't his role this game. You had an Annie that could go in. You had a Viego that had the ability to go in. His role this game was to make sure that the Aphelios was alive. Anytime that he saw the Rakan or the Ahri or the Wukong trying to dive his backline, he would sit on top, he would ult, he would disengage, and he would allow this Aphelios to do as much damage as possible. This is what you want to see out of a top laner. Incredibly high-level gameplay coming out from Ale, and very unselfish gameplay coming out from Ale. It cost his life a couple of times, but it was more than worth it in the end. He absolutely won multiple fights for EDG on his own. JJ was awesome. He was able to get a lot of resets in these fights. Mako was near perfect on his ability to keep Leave alive towards the back half of the game. The only dud spot, I want to say, on the side of EDG was Fofo in the mid lane, who just didn't have a very good game on the Annie. Those flash stuns coming out from Annie, especially coming off of watching the JDG BLG series, were just not very good. He was at best getting one or two members of the team, but certainly not creating this giant like pick center that you want to be playing around. Luckily enough, it wasn't necessarily a problem, but mid lane was certainly not the strength for EDG in game number 2. Leave was plenty good. Ale, JJ, and Mako all had really good games. It all more than made up for it. And then for OMG on the other side, definitely another a frustrating way to lose your first game of the series. But again, another game where you got down early and then made a pretty miraculous comeback. It was a 10k gold lead at one point for EDG, and boy, did it not feel like it. OMG ends up getting it back to like basically zero. I think like 1k, like 900 gold difference or something like that, as something absolutely ludicrous. But dud of the game was actually kind of difficult to pick because of that, because I think everybody kind of did their jobs at different points in the game. But my dud of the game is going to go to Cream in the mid lane. If he were able to land a few more charms in some of the back halves of these fights, this might have been a different game. He just didn't seem all that comfortable on the Ahri in this one. I don't necessarily think that's a him problem. He's really good at this champion. We saw that in game number 1, but it just wasn't meant to be in this game. He missed a couple of charms, and that ended up being that. He was able to steal the Baron, which was absolutely massive, and I would argue that he was still the better mid laner in this game, although I don't know. Fofo, maybe I wouldn't go that far, but I think Cream's missed opportunities in team fights were definitely a big reason why OMG couldn't exactly capitalize, but Abel was doing a ridiculous amount of damage. PP God had some truly extraordinary engages in this game, and I even think Shanji and Aki were really good for a frontline here. Unfortunately, they just weren't able to get it done, but now that the series is tied up, we're going to be moving on to a game number 3, and game 3 is very interesting. It's going to be a tale of who can gain the advantage between these two teams in that game, who can kind of separate themselves, and who can go up basically to series point here to move on to winners finals. And we're going to find out now, because the winner of game number 3 was EDG. They are able to take game number 3 and take control of this series, going 2-1 up in this game now. It is definitely do or die for OMG from this point onwards. As good as they have been playing, it only really matters if you win. Losing games, it doesn't matter how well you lose them in the playoffs. You got to be able to pick up victories, and while they were able to do it in game 1, it's now do or die for this OMG team. And for EDG, they are now sitting in a much better spot than they thought they would be in after how that game number 1 went. So really good stuff from this team to be able to bounce back, especially with how that game ended up going. Again, kind of similar to what ended up happening in the previous series. You could absolutely make a case that it should be 3-0 EDG right now after this third game, but they still played really well in this game number 3. Let's go ahead and talk about it. EDG actually got a small lead early, but it certainly wasn't a massive one. I would actually categorize early game as Jeje doing a really good job, and also Ale getting a solo kill in the top lane, because good for him. That just kind of happens now in the LPL. Somebody solo kills the Sion in the top lane. Sion has not been a particularly effective pick in the LPL across 2023 so far, or at least the playoffs at all so far, and that definitely tracked in this game as well. But Aki does a really good job to try and get some pressure back. He gets in the top lane, and then a really big second dragon fight that actually goes the way of OMG. They pick up a nice kill on Fofo after that as well, and they generate a pretty small lead. Like, it's like 1.5, 2k gold lead, but it's still a gold lead, right? OMG is sitting in a good position. And then, unfortunately, a really, really good team fight around third Drake for EDG. They were able to kind of, I wouldn't say funnel OMG right into the spot that they wanted, but they've got Ale on the Jax on a flank. They've got Jeje and Mako running at them, and OMG knows they have to disengage to the point where Abel can kind of get onto the backline and try to fight, but then the Jax shows up on the flank, and everything goes kind of wrong. OMG have to flash out. They end up losing 2, and they end up losing their lead basically from that point onwards. They feel like they have to make some crazy plays like they have in the first couple of games in the mid game here, and they go for a pick on what they believe to be an empty Xayah in the mid lane, but he's not alone. Fofo and Jeje and Mako are all there as well. Fofo ends up picking up a quadra kill in that exchange, and then from that point on in the game, it's going to be very difficult for OMG to come back. The Veigar being strong really creates a lot of obstacles, I would say, for OMG to have to overcome, and there's just not really a way for them to do that super efficiently. They do go for some crazy plays in the back half, some wild teleports, some interesting flank ideas, but honestly, like, watching the back half of this game, EDG was ready for a lot of the crazy things that OMG was going for. It really felt like they, after the first couple of games, had kind of gotten wise to the fact that they knew OMG was going to throw something at the wall, and they were kind of expecting that, and so when we got this pretty crazy flank from Shanji towards the back half of the game near the bot lane, it looked like the team was pretty prepared. Leave just ults, he's able to set up his Feather Storms, and then he's able to just kind of win the fight from there, and Fofo's able to obviously deal a ridiculous amount of damage as well. And EDG is able to come out on top in our shortest game of the series yet. My player of the game is going to go to Fofo in the mid lane on the Veigar. He was just a huge factor in the mid game as to why this team was able to turn around a lot of the, I don't want to say the deficit, because it really wasn't a massive deficit, but, it was able to turn around the fortunes of the way the game was going. His positioning is absolutely massive. Veigar can be a little bit of a hit or miss champion. Sometimes that champion's short range can definitely be a little bit of an issue at the pro play level, especially when going into something like Vi or Ahri that can kind of counter that relatively well. And also the hostile takeover isn't exactly super avoidable for a non-mobile champion like Veigar, but generally speaking, when he was able to get his stuff out, when he was able to survive in these fights, he was able to do a lot of damage. That quadra kill was massive for them, and then there really was no way to fight into a super fed Veigar in the back half of the game. Look at the team comp. Who exactly is going to be able to deal with him so long as EDG just peels them off? There really isn't a lot of reliable, consistent ways to make that work. Aki was going in on Leave, which was kind of the right choice. If only Leave wasn't super mobile and also had, a bunch of people peeling for him, but outside of the Vi, there really wasn't a lot of consistent ways to be able to engage here. So really good bounce back game from Fofo after what I thought was a pretty weak game number 2. But everybody else also doing their job. I think Broadcast gave player of the game to Ale in the top lane. Picked up that solo kill, a really nice flank in the mid game. He absolutely was super influential this game. I just thought that Fofo was a slight bit better. And certainly nothing against Ale. I thought he was really good. Jeje with some phenomenal pathing in the early game. That first blood bot lane is one of the most unexpected ganks that I've seen in a while. Not even Aki, who was farming literal Krugs like right next to the play, was expecting that play to happen, so big credit to EDG for pulling that off. And then Leave and Mako, they've just been super consistent. Xayah Rakan is a really good lane for both of these two, because it kind of gives them all what they want. Mako can initiate, but he can also peel, and Leave has the opportunity to self-peel a little bit while also being a really big carry towards the back half of the game. It's just a really nice comp coming out from EDG, and I like the way they executed on it. As for OMG on the other side, not exactly the best game of the series. In fact, I would argue it was their worst game of the series. They were in a decent position in the mid game after winning that one team fight around that second dragon and being able to get a nice pick off on the Veigar in the mid lane, but this comp just doesn't particularly scale into the late game if Abel doesn't have the gold. All of the gold was really on PP God, which is super unfortunate. The hostile takeovers were massive this game, and they really were doing a lot of damage, allowing players like Leave to be able to hit his team, or Ale in that same vein to be able to auto-attack his team, but they really had no initiation. They were relying a lot on the top side of their map to be able to do that, and Shanji was super far behind. He really wasn't tanky at all towards the back half of the game because of how bad his early game was. He's going to be my dud of the game. He just has not played Sion at a high level, and I would say that it's a him problem, but it's honestly been an LPL problem. Nobody at this level has played Sion at a particularly high level, and then Aki in the jungle was also not very good, in my opinion. Certainly not living up to the expectations that he had set for himself in the regular season. A lot of people are criticizing Cream's build, and I think this is one of the situations where I would agree. I think looking at this team with the Sion in the top lane, lane with a Vi in the jungle, you do probably want to go a little bit more damage. You can't necessarily go survivability in this game and expect to be useful. They were kind of letting him live towards the back half of these team fights because they knew he really wasn't going to do a lot of damage. If he wasn't landing charm, he wasn't useful. And Abel just wasn't ahead enough to actually be able to deal damage. His scoreline didn't really give him a lot of gold. A lot of the gold that was going on to OMG in the early game was not going to the bot lane, which was just super unfortunate for the Aphelios. But it was an okay game. It certainly wasn't the worst game of all time. It's not something you can't bounce back from, but you do have to bounce back from it. You are on the brink of elimination here. If you lose game 4, you're going down the lower bracket. But if you win it, you're pushing us to a Silver Scrapes game number 5. EDG obviously don't want that. They want to close out the series here, but can OMG keep it alive, or is EDG going to shut the train on the Miracle team? Well, the winner of game number 4 was EDG. They are able to take game number 4, and they're able to close out the series with a 3-1 series win. Massive coming out from Edward Gaming. They are moving on to the upper bracket finals, a chance to play for a shot at MSI and the LPL finals. Really, really good stuff coming out from EDG, and honestly, we kind of expected this going into the series. I thought OMG would put up a fight, but for EDG to be able to come out on top with 3 straight victories, it's not particularly surprising to me, but OMG definitely held their ground, and they definitely made it interesting. I think the first thing that I want to talk about, before we even jump into the game-by-game recap, is just a general thought, which is, I don't think that a single team that had a lead at 10 minutes in any game won that game. I think that every single game was won by a team that did not have the lead at 10. EDG had the lead at 10, and I think OMG had the lead at 10 in all 3 of the other games. Now, actually, maybe game 2, not so much, but 1, 3, and 4, I think were all, like, comebacks, if you will, like, turnarounds. It's just kind of insane how crazy this series ended up being, and how back and forth, honestly, it ended up being, but EDG coming out on top in a really fun game number 4. What ended up happening? Well, OMG actually looks really good in the early game. The solo lanes in particular are looking really, really good. Shanji's able to get a ridiculous amount of gold just generally in the top lane. He gets a solo kill on the Scion. The Scion ends up dying to another gank coming out from Aki. Aki spends a first blood in the top lane to be able to kill the Scion, even if he does die in return. Like, they spend a lot of time making sure that Ale is put pretty far behind on this Scion. He's going to be a little bit different later. I'll go ahead and get to that. But bot lane is also very explosive. A lot of pressure put in by both junglers into the bot lane. A lot of 3v3s coming down there. The 2v2 in the beginning part slightly goes in favor of EDG. It's a very close back and forth, but Abel ends up going a little bit too deep, and he ends up dying to the machine gun Mako on the Lulu. Really, really fun to see that. Always fun to talk about, but a lot of pressure early on. OMG getting a small win in a fight after that in a 3v3 bot, but for the most part, both of those just kind of cancel out, and they're both sitting relatively even in the bot lane. Really where OMG starts to generate their lead is a small Herald fight, yes, but the third Dragon fight. Shanji ends up roaming down on this Cassante, and golly is he strong. Like, he's playing so ridiculously well. He gets a really solid ultimate off onto Leave. He's able to basically kill him at the beginning of the fight. Jeje falls, Ale falls, Mako falls. I think Fofo's the only one who ends up getting out there. Maybe it was Jeje. Somebody survived. I can't remember who, but OMG, while not being able to get that third dragon, is able to get all of the gold off of that. Now they're at a really solid lead, a 3-4k gold lead, which is really good for OMG at this point in the game. Of course, I already told you how this ends up going. A huge pick on OMG's bot lane in the jungle. I can't explain this. This is a game and a series losing mental lapse coming out from Abel, and I can't even begin to tell you what's going through his head, but we've talked about Abel so much in the past few weeks. He is somebody who has grown so much. He's always been a little bit of a prodigy here in the LPL, someone who's always had incredible mechanical skill, but just hasn't been able to put it together. Well, that player who has struggled to put it together unfortunately came out here. He contests the red buff, which is fine in isolation, against 4 members of EDG. He gets caught out, dies. That gives everything on the map away to EDG. They're able to get the Dragon Soul basically for free. They're able to go fight for Baron and get that basically for free. I can't even begin to tell you what ends up happening here for OMG and for Abel in particular. This is a game-losing play, and it was really frustrating to watch live. I was screaming at my screen when I watched this, but then we just basically get to the point where gold is even, if you can call it that. I think EDG is relatively like 1k up ahead or so, and EDG just can't lose a front-to-back team fight. Cream tries his best. He plays phenomenal on the Sakali throughout the entire game, but really in a lot of these team fights, he's pulling back a lot of gold on the side of OMG. Shanji's trying his best, but EDG just has too much at this point, and they're able to win every front-to-back team fight, and they're able to close out the game. super unfortunate and super tragic way to have this series end, but good for EDG. Jej's gonna get my player of the game on the Elise. A lot of really good action in the early game, and he was super influential towards the back half. Really good objective control and just really phenomenal macro. I want to talk about Mako in that same vein as well. You can talk about maybe some of the plays that they shouldn't have gone for earlier on in the series, but this game was nearly perfect from EDG. Aside from some mechanical misplays in some of the team fights, like third dragon fight, I don't think that they made a play that I would necessarily disagree with at all in this game, and really for the most part, they just had so much tempo throughout the entirety of the game, even when they were behind in gold. You just have to give a lot of props to an EDG team that has always been really good at finding ways to maintain their pressure on the map. Want to give a big shout out to Fofo in the mid lane as well. They finally left up the Jace. It's been by far his most successful champion over the course of 2023, and he showed that off again here in game number 4. While game 2 wasn't perfect, games 3 and 4 for the mid laner were pretty great, and Leave was great for his first series. A little bit over-aggressive here in game number 4, but at the end of the day, as long as you're dealing damage, you're probably getting the job done as an AD carry, and he was dealing a lot of damage, especially towards the back half of this game. So big credit to EDG. They just played really well in this series, and now they're moving on to a matchup with JDG. We'll preview that obviously in just a second, but congratulations to this team. They are one series away from the LPL finals. As for OMG, they're going to be moving down to losers bracket now. It's definitely unfortunate. Dud of the game's going to go to Abel. Really tragic stuff coming out from him. I hate that this is the way the series ends, because I think Abel played relatively okay in this series, but you know, some of the weaknesses that I was worried about when it came to OMG going into the playoffs definitely kind of exposed themselves in this series. The ability to compete with other teams that are also really good at team fighting, I think, was definitely a question mark. And, you know, while I think they did a really good job holding their own, they weren't necessarily able to take a lot of those fights towards the back half of the game. When teams aren't making mistakes against them, are they going to be kind of consistent and disciplined enough to be able to not make mistakes against them? That was the question, and unfortunately, the answer to that in this series was a no. But they still showed a lot of promise, and this team definitely has an opportunity to still make it into top 3. I really like the way that they're constructed. Shanji and Cream were awesome in game 4. It just was the bot lane that wasn't necessarily up for the cause. But again, we're going to preview that lower bracket series in just a bit, but congratulations to OMG. They played really, really well to even get to this point. They are a top 4 team in the LPL. I think they proved that in this series, and, you know, it's going to be really interesting to see where they go from there. But good for EDG. Player of the series for me, kind of a tough choice, but I think I'm actually going to give it to Leave, their bot laner, their AD carry. He was probably the most consistent player across the team in this series, and so really good stuff for EDG. If he's able to continue that run, this team's going to be very dynamic, but they could be a very big, you know, favorite even, you know, depending on how you want to consider things for the LPL title if they continue to play like this. But now that we've covered both of the round 4 series, it's time to go ahead and talk about our round 5 series, or a kind of round 5 series. I guess you could call these, like, technically still round 4, but it's the series right before the semifinals, and it's after round 4. I'm gonna call it round 5. Sorry if that's not technically correct, but I'm gonna do what I want. It's my channel. Anyways, I'm excited to go over these matchups. There are a lot of interesting kind of configurations that we ended up with. I certainly didn't expect to see it, but I'm really excited to go over them. And of course, we're going to be starting with our lower bracket matchup because it actually comes first. It's the game that's going to be played first, so we're going to talk about it first on the channel. Of course, that matchup is between the number 5 seeded Bilibili Gaming and the number 6 seeded OMG. Really excited to see this series between these two teams. Both of them obviously just losing today, or at least in this video. We talked about them not being able to pick up wins in their series, but both of them putting up a really strong fight in different ways. I honestly like both of these teams quite a bit, so let's go over where some of the strengths and the weaknesses may lie. Let's cover the lanes first, starting in the bot lane with Elkanon taking on Abel and PP God. I think this is the biggest advantage that I could possibly give to BLG. They should absolutely have the lead in this series. Elkanon have been so good throughout the playoffs. Even in that series against JDG, I think you could argue that Elk was the better bot laner, and that's not to say Ruler was bad, but that Elk was really that good. He can play any style. He's a top 3 bot laner in the world right now. And for as good as Abel is, he just has those moments where it's not necessarily always there. I think PP God has helped him a lot in that front, but On's a very aggressive player, and if Abel's going to be mispositioned, this is the kind of team that's going to be able to take advantage of that. And so I see this as being in favor of BLG, and then when you look at the mid lane matchup, again, I think isolated, I would say Cream is a more mechanically talented player than Yagao, but Yagao offers so much to the team that isn't quantifiable. He's going to get other people on the team ahead. Cream is going to have more gold likely in this series, but Yagao could be just as big of an impact, if not bigger. Now, the matchup I'm really excited to talk about is Bin versus Shanji in the top lane. A really intriguing top lane matchup. Both of these top laners have actually received a lot of attention from their teams over the course of the playoffs. Bin in particular. Shanji, though, when he has been on carries, when he's been on things that he can play at a high level, he's been unstoppable. Obviously, the Rumble is probably going to be permabanned against him, but he's got other picks. When you give him something like Kennen, even the Cassante that I think he can really, like, have skill expression on, he can go toe-to-toe with Bin. He really is talented enough to do that, but Bin is on Fuego right now, which means that I would give this small advantage in that to BLG. But then we get to our key matchup of the series, and for me, it's the one left. That's going to be in the jungle. It's going to be Jun versus Aki. Now, regular season-wise, I would tell you that Aki definitely had a better regular season than what Jun was offering. I thought Jun was actually the weak link of BLG, 16th in KP percentage as a jungler. It's just not very good. Yes, he was second in GPM. Yes, he was fourth in CS per minute, but he was often, taking a lot of resources and not necessarily giving them back out to the rest of the team, which wasn't necessarily super beneficial, but that's changed a lot, I would say, throughout the playoffs. A lot of his pocket picks have been able to be a little bit more available to them in best of fives, and I think he's kind of paired up with Yagao a little bit more successfully than what he was doing in the regular season. I think that he absolutely has been playing at a higher level, which makes this matchup more interesting because I think Aki has actually taken a little bit of a step back from his regular season. I thought he was the best player on OMG. In the regular season, he was an all-pro for me in the jungle, that third-team all-pro, which you can see in he's fourth in KP percentage, he's 7th goal per minute, not really like the big damage dealer, but certainly someone that is going to be facilitating a lot and creating a lot of the action for OMG. Unfortunately, he just has kind of not been that in the playoffs. It's really been a lot on their solo laners to be able to generate leads on their own in lane, and then Aki kind of assisting them in the mid to late game on these more engaged type of champions. Now, that can be a big positive for the team. You can absolutely win with that, but it's not necessarily something that gives me the most confidence moving into this series. I would still give the slight edge to OMG here, if only because I trust Aki more as a player, but Jun's in better form, so it's definitely kind of a toss-up here, and I think whichever jungler ends up coming out on top is going to really influence the series a lot, which is why it's my key matchup of the series. But if I had to give my prediction, again, go off my analysis, not off my prediction. I always say this. My prediction is just a number that I throw out because people like to hear it at the end. This series could go either way, and, I've been talking about it, but I do think that BLG should be able to get the upper hand in this series. My prediction would be BLG 3-1, BLG 3-2. I think the series will be interesting, but BLG, quite frankly, should be the better team, and I think they're in better form right now. But OMG has been on a miracle run as of late, and it would be quite a shame if it stopped now. And then we move on to our second series to preview, and this is the one people are waiting for, the upper bracket finals here in the LPL. The winner of this series not only is going to be heading to the LPL finals, but they're going to be heading to MSI as well. It's a match between the number 1 seeded JD Gaming and the number 2 seeded Edward Gaming. Really excited to see these two teams. These are, in my opinion, the definitive top 2 teams in the LPL right now, and I'm really excited to see them go head-to-head in a best of 5. Let's go ahead and talk about, maybe some of the key matchups of the series where I think some of the advantages and disadvantages for both teams might lie. We're going to start in the top lane here with 369 versus Ale. If modern trends are to be believed, Ale should not really have a lot of trouble in this matchup. He's quite frankly just been better than 369 over the course of this year so far, and especially in recent form. 369 was kind of abused in that series against BLG, and Ale very much did the abusing in that series against Shanji, with the exception of game number 5, but again, Scion Duty, love that for him, but I would say top lane is a slight favor to EDG, especially with recent form. I would say regular season goes to Ale and playoffs go to Ale. It's not very often that you'll see me saying that about 369, but with this current form, I just don't trust him in that same way. In the jungle, you've got Kanavi taking on Jeje, and another matchup that I think I'm going to give over to the side of EDG. I really like them in this top side here. I think Jeje has been phenomenal over the course of the year on these early game initiators, and also on these team fighters. He just kind of does whatever you need him to do. He plays the Elise, and the Wukong, and the Vi at a high level, but he can play the Maokai. He can play some of these more scaling-oriented junglers. He can do really whatever you want, and honestly, same with 369. Kanavi hasn't exactly been playing his best League of Legends as of recent. Obviously, if he just jumps back into form, I'm not going to be entirely surprised. He's one of the most talented junglers we've ever seen in League of Legends. He's one of the most knowledgeable and intelligent junglers as well, but his mechanical form has really not been on point. If he doesn't get Lee Sin, he really hasn't been that same level of dominant. And so it's going to be interesting, but again, another matchup that I think I would slightly favor to EDG, but where I have a little bit of hesitation to say that is the bot lane matchup here. I'm going to skip over mid for a second. You guys already know why. But the bot lane matchup, boy, what a challenge for Leave. He's a rookie of the split in the spring, and he was obviously great in his first playoff series, but it's a little bit different going from facing off against Abel, who's another young up-and-coming player, to facing off against Ruler, you know, one of the greatest AD carries of all time, if not the greatest AD carry of all time. This is where I'm going to have to favor JD Gaming. As much as I like Leave, I think Ruler is just a really, really good player. When people are going to say he's Zeri locked, anybody who watched him in the regular season knows that is absolutely garbage. 8-2 on Varus, 6-0 on Aphelios. Not even only that, he can play the Lucian at a ridiculously high level. Remember Worlds last year? Does everybody just forget Worlds last year when Ruler was really good on a lot of these AD carries? Like, you know, he's really good. I know that the narrative isn't surrounding him right now, but I would favor Ruler and Missing in this matchup. I think Missing versus Mako is incredibly interesting, but, you know, in isolation, I think they're very similar players, and I think it's a lot of this bot lane 2v2 is going to come down to the AD carries, and that's where I favor JDG. But my key matchup of the series is going to be the one we skipped over. It's going to be the mid lane matchup. It's going to be Knight versus Fofo in that mid lane. Two very interesting players. Knight, obviously one of my favorite players on this channel, has been for a very long time. Second in gold per minute, fourth in damage per minute, third in KDA. A lot of really good stats carry-wise coming out from Knight, and Fofo actually kind of matching him in a lot of those. First in KDA, second in damage per minute, but he's third in KP percentage. The team, you know, moves around him a tad bit more. He's even sixth in damage percentage. Just a lot of really active stats for Fofo. I think these two players were very similar in terms of the impact that they had on the game in the regular season, but Knight has been more successful in the past. It's going to be interesting to see if Fofo's first major challenge of the playoffs, you know, if he can step up to that. This was somebody who had a really rough split going up against really good competition in 2022. 2023, it's been a huge year of resurgence for him, but Knight is a completely different challenge, and in the regular season, he didn't quite hold up to that, if you remember the series between these two, so it's definitely going to be interesting. But where do I think the prediction is going to go for this? Again, I think these are two very, very close teams. Any prediction I gave is going to be basically moot. The analysis is more kind of what I want to lean on, but if I had to give a prediction, I'm going to say JDG 3-2. The spread is JDG 3-2, EDG 3-2. If it goes either way, I would not be surprised at all. I think these are the two most even teams in the LPL right now. I think JDG at their best should be able to take this series, but they haven't been at their best as of recent, and EDG really looked very good in that series against OMG. I would say they're in better form, and a lot of people are going to pick them, but I just have faith in this JDG team. It's hard for me to overlook the incredible talent that they have. When you put Knight and Ruler in a do-or-die playoff scenario, I'm going to have to trust that they're going to be able to get it done, but that's it. It's going to be an incredibly close series, and I'm really, really hoping that both teams take each other to the limit. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LPL Round 4 overview and analysis of both series, as well as my preview for both of the Round 5 series. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you thought of the video down in the comments section below, and of course, let me know what your thoughts are on Round 5. Who do you think is going to be moving on to the semifinals, and then also the finals? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. Not only does it let me know you guys are enjoying it, but it also helps get this video out to a lot more people. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button. I don't only post LPL content, I post on all 4 of the major regions as well as the NACL. And with playoff coverage really rolling around for basically everybody right now, it's a great time to hit that sub button to get that daily content rolling into your sub boxes. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.